Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Searcher.
Here.
Mayor Polguda.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. First item up, capital improvement program update. Ms. Morris, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on the capital improvement program. We prepared a presentation just to give you an overview of the framework, and then we'll deep dive a little bit into the current 5-year program, talk about funding sources and external factors that could affect planning, and then Director Reuter will walk through 2 examples. So first, what we wanted to do was kind of show you our framework. So in support of our mission statement to deliver exceptional service to enhance our quality of life, and specifically to the council's focus area of high-performing teams, this framework is intended to tell you what we do, why we do it, and who we do it for. And so you can see that we start with a governance model, and that's really our guiding principles for the oversight of the whole program. So it's intended to make sure that as a town, we provide our citizens with the infrastructure that we need to provide them with services and the level of service that they require. And if the council would entertain, do you mind if I sit? I was hoping to be able to stand today, but with my 2 new knees, so I apologize.
Gotta give those things, get them warmed up, so you
Okay.
absolutely have a seat.
Thank you, I apologize. I'm on week 8 of my 2 new knees, so. So after the governance piece, we do a deeper dive into the policies, standards, and procedures. And so what that does is it ensures that whatever department has a project or a program, we are consistently performing throughout the town. So what does that provide? That provides consistency and transparency. And then we go deeper into the program. So we have the planning and design phase, and you can see that we want to ensure that from a project planning standpoint, that it's a repeatable process. Again, we're focused on making sure that the services that we provide are consistent and that they're always focused on delivery of delivery and making sure that we meet the needs of the community. So from a project design standpoint, we want to make sure that we always incorporate either the project management feedback, but also other stakeholders. So that includes council, that includes our citizens and residents. And as you know, CIP projects can take some time. And so we want to make sure at each key phase that we're always taking into consideration any changes. And then we also have the procurement phase. So what is that? That means that we are always focused on making sure that we have competitive pricing, that we always are consistent with our federal regulations, if it's federally funded, our state, and then our local requirements. And then we also want to make sure that the construction or the project itself is actually executed appropriately. And again, that makes sure that we are transparent in how we do things and that we're always focused on our residents. And then we always want to make sure that we also close out the project appropriately. And then we also want to make sure that the construction or the project itself is actually... I wasn't sure if there was a question.
Clerk, can you see if Councilman Freund can just, I think he's getting feedback. There's probably a little bit of a delay from what he's hearing, and it's coming across his phone.
Ken, I'm sorry. Can you mute your phone, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
I apologize. So what we wanted to show you is that we actually have a maturity model. And what do we use this for? The 5 components of the program that we just went through, we want to make sure that we're executing on all of them. So we developed a model to make sure that we're measuring where we are. The ultimate goal with being strategic, what does that mean? That means that we are always focused on meeting the strategic priorities of the council and the community. We have a maturity model. Should I continue?
As long as it's not bothering you, yeah,
Okay.
you're fine.
If you recall last year, we kind of introduced 2 pieces or phases of the capital improvement program. There's the capital improvement plan, which is really the piece that is the long-term detailed list of the capital needs that we have that are driven by the citizens' needs. And so these are pretty much the assets or infrastructure that we need to deliver services. Then we have the capital improvement financial plan, and that's how we make sure that we have resources to bring a project all the way through completion. And I'm calling this new because in the past, we've kind of modeled that first year. And now what you'll see when we bring back the fiscal year 26 plan, 26 through 30, is that we've dedicated resources or modeled resources to carry the plan out for the 5 years. So what goes into the capital improvement plan? There's a lot of inputs. And so what we wanted to show you here is that we show 3 main pieces. That's the strategic plans, master plans, the different studies that we do throughout the year. And then we also have community input and the council priorities. How do we support the ongoing costs? You saw all of the current infrastructure that we currently have in place. There is a cost to maintaining that over time. And then, of course, we're always looking for cost savings. The items that you see bolded in blue are items that we will bring forward in the future as improvements, but we kind of wanted to give you an idea of kind of what's coming down in the future. So once we have all these requests, right now between the capital request items for infrastructure and IT, we have close to 300 requests. We're very early in the budget, but how do we prioritize and evaluate those? We have a number of sources where we glean some criteria. One is the administrative policy. So we currently have a town policy called Fiscal Planning and Management. It's 405 for reference. What you'll notice is that these items we will be bringing back to you, actually an update to the revised policy, but what's currently included are things that are mandatory or regulatory, things that improve efficiency, reduce operating costs, and eliminate hazards. We also conducted a council budget survey, and we asked what criteria should we use to help us prioritize the capital improvement plan. And from there, we heard health and safety and property protections, and then we heard anything that's regulatory or mandatory should be considered, anything that promotes economic development, whether it's job creation or business growth, and then anything that maintains existing infrastructure, as well as if there's an alternate use of funding that might be available that's non-town, and then also anything that reduces long-term costs as far as operational efficiencies. There's other criteria that we also take into account. That includes the strategic plan and priorities, community feedback, and then surveys and best practices, and we have some examples listed for you there too as well. Another piece that we use, so we have the criteria for evaluation and prioritization, but then we also have some specific feedback that we receive from the surveys about what we should invest in. So on the budget survey, we asked what current infrastructure should the town focus on maintaining. So again, this is that current infrastructure that we showed you earlier. We heard streets and transportation was a priority, water quality, public safety, open space, sidewalks, and then so forth. We also asked the council in the budget survey from the list that we provided, which one of those would you prioritize for a greater investment? We heard water quality, stormwater and drainage, facilities and town-owned building improvements, streets and transportation, and so on. And you can see there's a common theme, which is great because that shows that our citizens and our council and staff are all in sync and aligned. The community survey, which we did almost over a year ago, we did have some questions not particularly on the CIP or the budget, but we did ask, what are your new investment priorities? And we heard open space, sidewalks, business and retail attraction, indoor aquatic center, rec center, and so on. And we also asked from an existing infrastructure standpoint, what are the operational and maintenance priorities? We heard maintaining streets and roads, water conservation, and wildlife habitat, and so on. And again, you can see that there's a lot of common themes here, which helps us prioritize the projects as we review them. So we wanted to give you an idea of how the 5-year capital plan can change year over year. And a lot of those drivers are really what are the needs of the community, what's different in the community. And so you can see that 25-29 was the largest 5-year plan that we had within the last 5-year period at $326 million. This gives you a little bit of a breakdown to show you where that investment is. So you can see in fiscal year 25, we had $82 million. So from the 5-year CIP plan, or the capital improvement plan, and the 5-year financial plan, we take that first year and put it in the annual budget. So the fiscal year 25 budget actually includes those expenses for $82 million. The largest of those are really the Quailwood PFAS project. We have the YMCA recreation facility in there, and then we have Glassford Glassford Hills Road. And then you can see over time, again, it's based on kind of what we need over time, facilities, water, wastewater. You'll see a lot of the PFAS in there as well. And then in fiscal year 27, that large piece is utilities and public works building. And so again, we review these projects each year. So once it's in the 5-year CIP, we don't stop analyzing it then. Every year we ask them to fill out the same form, do the same justification, the same risk assessment, because things can change over time. So again, what's in the capital budget? So we talked about that a little bit earlier, where we take the first year, the 5-year CIP, and the first year, the 5-year CIFP, which is the financial plan. So what can you expect from those items that come before you with the annual budget? You can expect that those are fully vetted, that we've looked at costs, we've looked at risks, we've looked at alternatives. We know that we have the resources to actually complete that project within the time that it's anticipated. And so this will come before you again later in May to approve. The things that aren't funded, whether it's because of a financial constraint or a non-financial constraint, if it's in existing infrastructure, that becomes deferred maintenance. What does that mean? That means that we keep it on the list, but we know that eventually we're going to have to make those investments. So again, it's about the trade-offs when you're looking at limited resources. So this is just another breakdown of the current year budget. So again, in fiscal year 25, we have an $82 million investment. It breaks it down by project. You can see that the values range anywhere from under 100,000 to over 20 million, or over 10 million. What you'll notice is that generally a capital improvement project is identified as something over $100,000 or something that adds efficiencies and longevity to an asset. But if we receive a request for something under 100,000, but it's complex, so it might have easements, it might have an IGA, it might have those type of complexities in it, we'll also include that in the CIP plan because we manage those a little bit differently than those that might be less complex. What this also shows you is the funding mix here, and we'll kind of talk about these a little bit more on the next slide. So potential funding sources to consider. I think that's always the biggest question is we have a lot of requests, we have limited resources. What do we have in our toolbox? One of the things that we have is the pay-as-you-go. So what does that mean? That means that we can save over time or we can use current resources. If you relate that to being a homeowner, you might know that you have a remodel or a repair that you have to do. Maybe you can't pay for it all at once, so then you put away money so that you can do it later. It's kind of the same kind of concept. One of the things we can also use is one-time revenues. So what's a one-time revenue? It's something that we can't count on on an ongoing basis. So the best example of that is really construction sales tax. If you think about that, if we have a business come in and they build a building, they're only going to build it once, so it's one-time money. So we set that aside for things like strategic investment and capital. The other piece, I think we've talked a lot about the budget where we have revenues exceeding expenses. In those years, we have what we call a surplus, so we have more revenues than expenses. That becomes our savings account or our fund balance. So those are the pay-as-you-go type of items. That's traditionally what the town has done over time. There's other items that other funding sources we can seek. There are capital grants that can be from the federal, state, county level, or even tribal level. Before we enter into an agreement for a grant or before we pursue one, we do a lot of analysis. A lot of times a grant will come with stricter guidelines or administrative burden, and so we try to balance that with our resources. Also, there are different requirements. For example, a federal grant may require that we use Davis-Bacon. That could increase the price of the project. And so we take all of those items into consideration. Next, we have development impact fees. Those are very restricted. Generally, what that means is that we're charging a fee so that growth can pay for growth. And the projects that are eligible should be included in the infrastructure improvement plan or the development impact fee study. So again, those are very restricted. We could look at developer contributions. Those come from development agreements. One of the examples is that if you think back to Granville, we had the developer pay for actually the middle piece of the the median, yep, and the landscaping. And so pretty much what a developer contribution is they'll either provide the town with cash or with assets for kind of in exchange for the right or the ability to develop land. Debt, so you can think about debt, if you think about your current mortgage, if you're a homeowner, instead of paying for a house up front, you may get a mortgage, and so that you'll pay over time. In a government situation, debt is a good tool to use, and the reason is that it provides intergenerational equity. So the thought is that you have a loan that goes over, or debt that goes over a period of time, and so the people who are paying back the debt payment through taxes or excise taxes or fees, they're actually the ones who are enjoying the benefit. So a lot of times it's about building now for future generations to enjoy and also be able to pay that piece back. There's different debt tools that you can use. There's general obligation bonds, there are revenue obligations, and then there are revenue bonds and loans. The other piece that we have in our toolbox is that we are actually, you'll see this in the next coming weeks or months, we're looking at proposing a citizen advisory committee. And one of the things that staff will bring before them is whether or not a revenue obligation bond or revenue obligation would be appropriate. And so what that means is that obligation is pledged with excise taxes, and one of the things that you can do is you can dedicate TPT or sales tax to pay either the debt service or ongoing costs, and so it wouldn't be a new tax, it would be a slight increase on our current tax rate, but those are kind of the things that you can analyze. And then we also have the ability to do a public-private partnership. What does that mean? That means that the town would construct and own a facility, but then they would lease the right to use to another entity. It could either be a government entity or it could be a private entity. And so there's, again, pros and cons for all of these, but they're all tools within our toolbox. We wanted to kind of graphically show you our different capital areas and our funding opportunities. So along the left, you'll see the capital projects by category, and then across the top, you'll see the funding sources. All of these are very restricted. The least restricted of all the resources that you see is the general fund. And so we can use that for pretty much any general governmental use, whether that's facilities, library, culture, recreation, public safety, or transportation. We have the Highway User Revenue Fund. You'll often hear people refer to that as the HERF Fund. That's restricted by Arizona revised statute and can only be used for transportation, so that's streets and roads. We talked a little bit about the capital grants. Those are generally very specific in purpose or for a specific project. And again, those come with a lot of different conditions that we have to weigh when we look at using that funding source for a project. We have the Capital Project Growth Fund, which is really dedicated to infrastructure, either general governmental or transportation. We tend to use the bulk of that for streets and roads. What that is it's funded by the construction sales tax that we set aside. We also have a Streets Capital Project Fund. This is funded by a portion of our TPT or sales tax, and what that is used for is actually to pay debt service down on the revenue obligation debt that we currently have. And then we have development impact fees, which we talked about a little bit earlier, very restricted. The projects that are eligible for that you'll see in the infrastructure improvement plan or the development impact fee study. And then on the enterprise side, we have system capacity fees, which are really related to growth, either on the wastewater and water side. And then we have resource fees, which are gathered in a fund, and those are only dedicated to purchase water rights. And then the enterprise funds, which are stormwater, wastewater, and water, all have an operational fund, and they can use that to invest in capital improvements. And again, that's just dedicated to those enterprise funds. So in the capital improvement project or program, we take into account all of those items that we showed earlier, our strategic plan, council priorities, feedback from the community, and then we look at prioritization and evaluation, but then we also look at external factors. We kind of just wanted to give you an idea of some of those factors. One of them is this construction cost index. This is by Mortenson, and you can see that they track it both on a national basis and then in the Phoenix area. They actually track it within 7 large metropolitan areas, but you can see over time the index has grown. And so when we look at the cost of a project that we might have included in our plan at the beginning of the 5 years that we just looked at, some of that could be cost escalation rather than, changes in scope. And so you can see over time it's had quite the effect on what we can budget for. Some of the other external factors that we look at are both construction or labor and then material. These are both can be an indication of inflation, and you can see again over time how that's gone up. We've actually seen some flattening on the labor statistics, and so that's promising because if we did start a project, theoretically, there's a labor force out there to complete the construction. You can see on the material side, we are seeing some prices go down finally. And so, structural steel, that was a big one a number of years ago, and reinforcing material, you can see that's gone down 23%. So those are all great indications for our future CIP plan. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Director Reuter to walk you through 2 other examples, unless you have any questions at this time.
Council, will you have any questions for Ms. Morris? Let's get Selena taken care of right now, so go right now if that works.
Ms. Morris, thank you for the hard work that you and your department do for the town residents. I thought it was very ambitious that you took us through fiscal year 29, and that's a good thing. But do you think we have far greater funding needs for all the projects we want than we actually have the money for?
That is a great question. And so when we bring back the 5-year CIP, we actually will have the resources matched with the requests. And so if the council would entertain that, when we bring back the plan, we can show you how that would all weigh out.
I have 2 more questions, if I may, Mayor. Are there other revenue sources that we could be looking at to create more stable funding streams in some of these projects? For instance, I understand we will go into debt over the water projects such as PFAS.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, we do look at a number of different funding sources. On whether or not it would be appropriate would just depend on the project. So it's a great question, but if we could bring back additional information, that would be great.
Last question, please. How were you able to forecast the 5 main capital improvement types into the fiscal year 29 total of $326 million? Is that input from all the department heads?
My Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, that's correct. We went through the same process last year. We just actually added additional criteria this year, but we weighed the needs of the departments with the council priorities to evaluate those and enter them on the 5-year plan. So they're all based on needs and assessment.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilman Freund, do you have any questions for Ms. Morris?
Not at this time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Thank you.
All right, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. I'm just going to pick up the last couple slides here. What you're going to see if you go back one, sorry. What you're going to see in your 5-year plan, there are 2 types of projects that you'll see. This is an example of a program. So the programs will typically run year over year for replacing existing infrastructure. This one just happens to be our signal system upgrade program. If you think about when the town was constructed in phases, most of the signals are not the same manufacturers. They were not put in by the same contractor. They're not wired the same. The actual cabinets are not the same. And so as we do these upgrades year over year, we are being consistent on replacing with the same brands, the same type of electronics, upgrading our signals with the same type of equipment. So the 2 factors on that. 1, our staff can get trained easily if we have the same system on every single intersection. 2, we don't have to keep inventory in stock for multiple vendors and multiple different types of systems. So you will see programs like this, and it's not just in Public Works, but utilities have these type of programs, as well as Parks and Rec and other departments. And then the other type of project that you'll see are actually one-time large projects, right? And so these can have multiple funding sources. This is just one example of our thought process as we walk through a project. So this one happens to be Glassford Hill Road expansion that's currently in design. And so what do we do? What's the process? So first, we are looking at the project need, right? Is it a regional need? Is it in the simple forecast for regional roads? Is it in our local needs? So we look at all of those needs and studies, and then we plan appropriately. The second thing we have to do is obviously staff has to identify those needs, put them in the correct year, and then identify a funding source. For Glassford, we just happen to have a really good advocate to get us some state funding for $9.9 million, which pushed this project ahead. Otherwise, without that funding, we probably would still be in the planning phase and not in the design phase. So through that, we get appropriated funding for the project. That gets approved through the budget by mayor and council. And then the project, we start the planning phase, right? And I'm a big planner. People don't like that, but I like to plan, so I have to do one thing one time. I don't rush through it, so I don't have to fix it on the back end. So yes, it does slow down the process sometimes, but on the back end of that, we have a better project for our citizens, more efficient, less costly. So I am a big proponent of that. I know my team is as well. So for example, a planning study would be, okay, let's do a traffic impact analysis. Let's look at all the developments along this area. Let's make sure we're coordinating with them so that we're not tearing up the road more than one time, right? So those are just some key things we're looking at. Then we move into the design phase, which we go out for procurement, professional engineering design, bring them on board. They're part of our team. They design the projects. We send the design plans out to all of the departments. We have meetings. We send them out to all the utilities. We do not release a project for the construction phase until all the utilities have signed off on a no conflict letter, or they are in the process of relocating their utilities. The worst thing that can happen is we award a contract for a roadway, and now we're held up by a utility company, and now that contractor is charging the town standby time for all of the equipment that's sitting there not moving on the project. So we make sure that we get all of those things done in advance. The other thing that we do is we make sure we have all of the easements and land acquisition, and that's the phase that we're in right now for Glassford Hill. So we have several drainage easements and slope easements that we're working through. So we're sending out letters to the property owners to acquire those easements. Again, we will not bid this project until we have all those easements in hand, so we don't slow up the contractor on the back end. And then we go into the construction phase. Most important part of that phase is our ability to do proper inspections and documentation. We want to make sure that we are delivering the highest level and it meets the engineering standards and specifications that were bid to the contractor. And then once the construction is completed, we do a project closeout that's with finance, that's releasing bonds, that's also starting the 2-year warranty process. So 2-year warranty process starts. Our team at 1 year and 8 months, we go out there with the contractor and we walk the project. Okay. Is there any cracked curbing? Is there any settlement? Is there, dead trees in the landscaping that need to be replaced before that 2-year warranty is up? And then once we do a punch list, they address all those punch list items, then we release the bond. And that's the other type of project that you'll see in this plan. And with that, I think that's the last slide, and Selena and I are happy to answer any questions.
Council, we have questions? Seeing none? Thank you, ladies. Next up, fire hydrant installation program, Mr. Wadsworth.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Is that because I pushed on?
Had a seizure there for a moment.
Today, we're going to give you a presentation on our fire hydrant installation program. And, this is something that we've been doing for a number of years. And, in light of the California fires and some of the problems they've run into out there, I know you have received more questions and concerns from the citizens. And so we wanted to provide this information to you and the public as far as what we've been doing, what we're continuing to do. And I know there's a lot of questions that you get about why don't we have enough fire hydrants in town? And so I'm going to turn this over to Andrew Powell. He's a utilities engineer with our department, and he's going to run you through this presentation, and at the end, I'll be back up here to help answer questions and such.
Thank you, sir.
Andrew?
Welcome, Mr. Powell.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here today. As Neil said, I'm a utilities engineer. And today I'd like to talk to you about our annual CIP, the new fire hydrant installation program. Providing a little bit of context and background, this is our existing system. The map shows all of our water lines, that's the blue, and then each one of those dots is our existing fire hydrants. You can kind of tell right off the bat that there is a difference in spacing between some parts of town. The central part of Prescott Valley, the more residential part, those older neighborhoods, that water system was originally private and acquired in 1999. These areas are where we see fewer hydrants and more distance between these hydrants. They're also where we see a lot of undersized infrastructure, small water lines that reduce the fire department's ability to fight fires. And so that's the issue that we have with our current infrastructure is it negatively impacts our fire department's ability to do their job. So that brings about this fire hydrant installation program. The goal of it is to focus in these parts of town, these more residential areas that have fewer fire hydrants. It's a program we've been doing about 4 years. During that time, we've installed 40 new hydrants, and that we do that with an approximate budget of about $150,000 annually. In these maps right here, you see there's the central Prescott Valley, which are those older parts of town. There's also the Prescott Country Club. Both areas we've gone to and installed hydrants in the past. All the blue ones we've done those in past years. And then the yellow ones are currently proposed for this year. We do have a contractor selected for that. It still needs approval, but pending that, we anticipate these hydrants will be finished in 3 months or so. And I'll also point out that when we have the opportunity to utilize another CIP project for installing hydrants when the scopes kind of align, we try and take advantage of that opportunity as best we can. We would love to, but unfortunately we can't install fire hydrants just anywhere. In fact, we can't install fire hydrants in most places. So I'm going to go through the major constraints that we face. The first is small water lines. I mentioned that earlier. Many of these water lines they don't have the pressure to provide the flow for the fire department that they need. The location of existing water lines, we have a lot of public utility easements that are not accessible to the fire department in an emergency. And then we have conflicts with other utilities, underground infrastructure that you can't necessarily see from the ground. I'm going to elaborate on all these, but here's just a example of 2 of those. This is a back easement or a public utility easement in the back of people's property. And you can see it's not very well maintained or accessible. And then there's an electrical box there indicating some underground conflicts as well. So the first of those are the small water lines. They create a large issue. There are a significant number of 4-inch and smaller water lines. We call those the small water lines. They do not meet fire flow standards that we have today. Fire flow is the volume of water needed to put out a fire, and pretty typical for residential neighborhoods is 1,000 gallons per minute. And it'll go up from there. Commercials typically more 1,500 gallons per minute. And so those small water lines cannot facilitate that fire flow. We look to the 6-inch and larger water lines to do that. Even the 6-inch are kind of small. 8-inch water lines are what you see typically installed in new development these days. So we're trying to start with that in future development. So those meet fire flow requirements. And then 10-inch lines and larger, there are very few of them in our system, but they are the most ideal for providing fire flow without negatively impacting pressure. This map here that I'm showing, it's panning back and forth. The first picture, here let's go. This picture right here is all of our water system. And as it pans away, it's removing those 4-inch and smaller water lines. And so you can kind of tell how our options are like cut in half when that right there is 6-inch and larger water lines that we could feasibly use. So there's quite the decrease when you eliminate small water lines. The second constraint are the locations of these water lines. They're either in a public utility easement or the town right-of-way. Public utility easements in this area where we're trying to focus our efforts, we call them back easements. They're in the back of properties, largely accessible. Sometimes they're not even accessible just for our standard operations, much less an emergency. So we face that problem. Even if it's a big enough water line, if we can't access it, we can't put a fire hydrant there. And most of them do have small water lines anyways. We prefer the town right-of-way. It would be right off the road. It could be very visible, very accessible. You can put it at an intersection so the fire department can run lines in multiple directions. And all new fire hydrants, it's imperative that they're accessible, but almost all of them are installed in the right-of-way. This map here is a continuation of the last one. So we'll start off with the 6-inch and larger lines right there. And as it pans away, it's going to remove all of those that are in back easements. So we're whittling away our options here, and you can kind of see how it's can't just point to a spot on the map and put a hydrant there. That'd be great though. And then our last constraint are utility conflicts. We share right-of-ways and public utility easements with sewer, APS, gas, telecom, storm drainage, and even, in some cases, reclaimed water. Every time we experience that or have a utility conflict, we risk damaging another utility's infrastructure. So we want to avoid that. And in order to do that, coordination is, more coordination is required, more design, more time, higher costs. So when we can avoid utility conflicts, that's the goal. Something that looks great on the surface, when you look at the underground, it can actually disqualify a location. These pictures here, they're of Prescott Valley. The top one you can see our blue water line going through there, and then you see 2 more pipes right on top of it. At least one of those 2 pipes is an APS power line. And in these situations, the workers have to pull the power line away to make repairs. And it does have some give, but it's still a risk that we're taking that we don't want to. And that bottom right photo is a worst case scenario. If we excavated that, we would find another location and bury it or come back and fix it. And here's a nice diagram of what underground utilities look like. Unfortunately, they're not spaced apart as nicely as this is. But even when it is, you see there's a lot going on underground that could create conflict. There's also a picture of a fire hydrant assembly there. It's not just the red hydrant on top. It requires a lot of components too. And that entire area has to be free of conflict. All right, so all those constraints contribute to the cost of the projects and how much each fire hydrant would cost. I'm going to go over 3 scenarios with you and explain them. So the low-cost option, which is where we are focused right now, we would be able to install a hydrant on an existing line that's 6 inches or larger, and it would just be kind of like point construction, not a very big footprint. We would avoid utility conflicts and avoid shutdowns. And then just as an example, we could locate it right at an intersection in the right-of-way, right off the road. That's our ideal, and that's a low-cost option. If we're looking at a high-cost option, you may have 50 to 100 feet of water line that you have to construct. You will probably have utility conflicts. There may be a water shutdown. And as an example, I'm going to show a map on it in the next slide, but As an example, if you were to extend one of these back easement water lines that aren't very accessible to the roadway, you could put a hydrant on it there, but that's quite a few more linear footage of construction. And then the very high cost option would be 100 feet or more of water line, and that would require design, construction, would have several utility conflicts, likely a water shutdown. And the example here is installing a brand new 8-inch water line down a public street and putting hydrants on it. All right, I'm going to explain this map a little bit. So on the left side here, you have a thick blue line. That's a 6-inch and a 12-inch water line. Those are adequately sized for a new fire hydrant. In fact, you see an existing fire hydrant on it already. There's also a 6-inch on the upper right side that is sized correctly, but it's in a back easement. These back easements are in orange, and you can kind of see they're in between the properties at the back. All these customers are receiving their service from the back of their house. And some of those easements have 4-inch water lines in them. So even in just this little snippet, it's hard to find locations to put hydrants, but here's the low-cost option. Put a hydrant right there at that intersection on the mains that are adequately sized. That's what we're going for. That's about a $15,000 investment. That's what we're currently doing, and that's what the upcoming project is, really just small construction. The higher cost option would be taking that 6-inch back easement water line and extending it to the right of way and installing a hydrant there. That could be $50,000, maybe upwards of $150,000. Not knowing the exact situation, it's hard to gauge, but it is a much more costly project. And then the very high cost would be bringing a new 8-inch water line from that 6-inch on the right, that back easement water line, all the way to the 12-inch on the left. That option is very robust, but it is very expensive too, $150,000 to $500,000. It's a big range, but it depends on how much linear footage, how many hydrants we're going to be able to install. So those are the options. Our priority right now, like I said, are those low-cost options. There are still places that we can do that to, just minimal construction, and we can avoid utilities, and that's where our goal is right now. Getting the most hydrants for the lowest cost. Lowest cost, minimizing constraints, and finding the places that'll produce the highest fire flow as we can. And then long term, of course, we want to address those more difficult locations, and we'll have to get creative with how we do that, but likely the cost per hydrant will go up. What's flashing right here are places we're going to look into in future years. A lot of these, probably half or more, we're gonna find something wrong with them that we wouldn't be able to put a hydrant there. But we're looking ahead into the future and trying to find all those places now so that we can get the low-hanging fruit and come back and find those more critical areas that we weren't able to before. So with that, I'm gonna hand it back to Neil. Thank you guys very much.
All right, so at this point, we're just going to open it up to questions for you. And I did want to let you know that unfortunately, so I had talked to Chief Fire Marshal Daryl Turpak, and is he here? Awesome. So he's here. So if you have any questions that I can't answer that are fire related or their operations, he's here, and he can answer those kind of questions as well. So hopefully we can give you a complete picture of everything that we're looking at. And so with that, I'll just ask you guys if you have any questions or anything you want to know.
Excellent. Sir, great presentation. I don't know who put that together, but it was awesome. And if we can get that on the website, that'd be terrific, because I think a lot of people just don't understand exactly what you explained to us. And by explaining to them why we don't have something in that location right in front of their house, it's going to make a world of the difference. So I also believe that your strategy of just doing everything you can with the cheapest way to put as many hydrants as quickly and easily as possible at a low cost is what we need to do until you come back to council and say, hey, guess what, guys, we've done it as much as we can. We've We have nowhere else to put the cheap ones. And I just ask that we just focus on the core of Prescott Valley and don't try to venture out anywhere else in the county or outside of our area. That'd be good.
Yep, yeah.
Vice Mayor.
Mr. Wadsworth, was going to ask about the 4-inch water mains, because I imagine some of those in the back easements are getting pretty old. I mean, aging infrastructure. So can you walk us through what happens when one of those goes bad?
Sure. I mean, right now, when they go bad, what you have is you end up with a water leak, right? And we're not going in and replacing 200 feet or 500 feet of pipe. If we do that, it's a much higher cost and you're having to put residents out of service and do new construction. So essentially, we're cutting out a section of pipe, however, whether it's a 4-foot section or a 10-foot section, and we're coming in with pipe couplings and a brand new section of either ductile iron or PVC pipe, and we're making the repair and putting it back together in the same location and basically the same size pipe.
Councilman Williams, you have anything?
Mr. Wadsworth, thank you for all you and the rest of your staff do for this town. I'm very concerned with the absence of fire hydrants, and it just bothers me from a safety perspective. I have 2 questions, one for the chief. What are the alternatives if we can't put in water lines with appropriate 6, 8, 10-inch pipes? Or what are some of the workarounds that we could be looking at?
Well, so obviously we could go back in through the entire town and put in new water lines, but that's obviously a very, very expensive proposition. You're talking, $50 million. You're talking really, really high numbers at that point. That's what we can do if we can't get anything on our existing system. And in terms of workaround, I'll let Chief Turpak respond to that question.
Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. So currently, when we have a situation where we don't have any fire hydrants or a small amount of fire hydrants, every station that we currently house has a water tender with it. So when a call kicks out, if it's in an area that has not enough water supply for us, we'll bring a water tender with us. So that's our workaround currently.
And as a water tender, like we might have referred to them in past years, a water buffalo, a big...
Yep, big tanker truck, and generally have anywhere from 3,000 to 7,000 gallons of water on it.
Okay. What does your agency do to make sure that they can put out fires in some of these key areas on the hydrant map?
So everything that we're going to work off of are our tactics and strategies. We strategically place things, and then we'll strategically attack a fire. So that depends on how many fire engines are going to come in and how many tenders are going to attach to that call as well.
Thanks. Mr. Wadsworth, can I ask you one? When we build future road projects, are there opportunities to redo some of the water lines in some of those areas?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to back this up to the map originally starting out. This map. So one of those, actually 2 of those locations where we actually did just that. If you'll notice on that map, Sunset Lane over going east or west of Prescott Valley towards Prescott East Highway area, you'll see fire hydrants all along there. As you may be aware, that road was redone a couple of years ago with the county as well. And there was when they were tearing up the road and putting in storm drains, we actually added an 8-inch water line running down that road where there wasn't one before. And we installed fire hydrants at every one of those intersections, because you can see going north and south from those locations, there aren't any other fire hydrants over there. And so when that road was redone, we participated and did that. And the same thing over more on the east side, closer to Highway 69. The blue dots that you see up there are on Florentine Lane, where that road was redone about 2 years ago. And we upsized piping in there and added additional fire hydrants as well.
Thank you.
Councilman Freund, do you have anything?
can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you. Yes, sir.
Okay. No, I think that what's been proposed here and the way they're doing it is very sensible and logical, and I basically support that.
Thank you, sir. And yes, just to reiterate, you've added 40 fire hydrants in the last 4 years. So if we continue doing that over the next, 6, 8 years, this map's going to be pretty red, I'm assuming, after a while, so.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get them in everywhere we can, and there will still be gaps in there. And then we'll have to look at what we do to address those locations.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Anything else? Nothing else being said? Folks, thanks for coming out.